Hey everybody, I'm Ken Spinagle and welcome to the Rest Drive Garage. For this project, I'm going to be building a set of Adirondack chairs. The chairs are for a neighbor of mine. They're going to be built from an African hardwood called Iroko. It's known as an African Teak, although it is not actually teak, but it's a nice blonde colored wood. It's very nice wood, very dense wood, and I think it's perfect for making a set of outdoor chairs, some outdoor furniture. Um, my objectives for this particular project, besides of course building the chairs, is I want to learn how to resaw, and I want to practice my skills at routing using a routing table. At the end of this video, I will go over some lessons learned. And I think that's one thing that I want to try and do for all my videos is go through this journey, is to make sure that people get to understand what I'm trying to achieve. Besides the end result, there's always going to be a lesson learned that I'm trying to get to. Of course, with most projects, there may be some unexpected lessons learned. So there's a lot to do. Let's get started. As you can see, I've already taken the first step of the project of breaking down the boards into more manageable pieces. The boards were all 6 quarters in thickness, approximately 12 feet in length, and varied in width between 6 and 13 inches. I had purchased the lumber from Roberts Plywood here in Deer Park, Long Island. In addition to plywood and veneers, they have an excellent selection of domestic and exotic lumber. I wasn't very confident in my ability to plane or resaw boards of this length, so I marked out each piece using a wax pencil. And even though I would need to do this again after resawing, this did help me in figuring out how best to break down the boards. While I'm still learning how to best record my work, there are steps in this process that were not recorded. For example, preparing the boards for resawing. You want to make sure that the edge of the board riding along the surface of the bandsaw table is perpendicular to the fence so that you're not cutting across the board at an angle. This would give you a board with different thicknesses on either side. Before starting to resaw, I used my table saw to make sure that each had an edge that was perpendicular to the surface. Here you can see me resawing a couple of the boards. Because of the density of this particular wood, I'm taking my time pushing it through. Sorry for the wobble of the camera. One of the minor lessons learned is to keep the camera equipment stable when recording. After resawing all the boards to about 7/8 thickness, it was time to clean up the front and back by running the boards through my DeWalt 735X planer. I should mention here that soon after getting the planer, I'd replaced the blades with the Bird Tools Helix cutter head. This has been an amazing upgrade and well worth the expense. In order to make sure that the boards were flat and level, I used a baseboard which allowed me to add shims where needed so that the lumber would not wobble as it went through the planer. After each board passed through the planer, I would place the corresponding resaw board back on top so I could more easily keep track of which new board was used for which parts. Okay, all the boards have been milled to their desired thickness, and it's time to trace out all of the parts so that I can start cutting them out. This turned out to be a bigger job than I had expected. Here are the templates that I purchased from Jackman Works. Because there are so many parts for each chair, I created a spreadsheet as my cut list. This allowed me to keep track of the parts as they were traced and then cut. This is where the project really began to take shape for me, and I was able to form a better picture in my mind of just what the chairs would look like when they were completed. Here I am tracing out the parts on the plane surfaces of each board so that I can cut them out later on the bandsaw. What you don't see here is that I had marked the templates prior to tracing so that I knew where each should overlap the edge so that the arms did not come out wonky or look different from each other. I've sped up this segment of the video so you can see some of the parts that were traced, but it does look like I've had a bit too much caffeine today. Then came the main legs. Followed by the supports for the arms and finally the legs which support the back of the chair. I've laid out the boards along with the corresponding templates. I'll take a final look at each board before I start cutting out the individual pieces. Here, I'm cutting out the slats for the chair seat. As I'm cutting each piece, I'm trying to get as close to the trace line as possible without actually cutting on the line. This will give me a good amount of material to cut away from on the router without running the risk of me cutting the piece too thin. I'm taking my time cutting these pieces out. I've used the bandsaw before, but never on hardwood, so I don't want to accidentally push too hard or too fast and cause the blade to snap or jam. In order to cut out the supports for the armrest, I swapped the 3/4 inch blade for a 1/4 inch blade. Because I'm getting closer to the blade, I put on a set of cut resistant gloves and I'm going super slow. But again, this section of the video has been sped up. Okay, all the parts are cut out and ready for routing. I had initially started with a 1/4 inch compression flush trim bit. I figured this would be sufficient because that's what other woodworkers are using on their own projects. It did not occur to me that the diameter of the bit played a critical role. It took about 10 minutes before I realized that it started burning the edges due to buildup on the bit itself. I then went to a 1/2 inch compression bit and things did improve, but still the blade became clogged. I think the issue has more to do with the material and not the blades themselves. After doing some research, I found that Iroko does have a tendency to dull blades rather quickly. I then swapped it out for this monster from SPE Tools. This flush trim bit is like something you'd see in your jointer. I'll include a link in the description below. Just like the compression bits I started with, this bit isn't for everything. But once I got past the incredibly loud noise it made, I found that it went through this Iroko like it was butter. The bit produced a super clean edge, and just like the blades in your jointer or the Helix, each individual cutting head can be rotated or even replaced. Okay, all the edge routing is done, and it's time to pre-drill the holes where I can. Then I'll sand to 180 grit before moving on to apply the finish. I do not have a sprayer for finishing, so each piece will be treated separately. I first applied 2 coats of Total Boat wood sealer and followed that with 4 coats of Total Boat marine spar varnish. Iroko does not necessarily need to be sealed, but since the chairs are going to remain outside and I wanted them to last, I figured it was worth the time and effort. For those parts of the chairs that will come in direct contact with the ground, I created epoxy resin feet instead of drilling holes for the feet or sliders. To do this, I wrapped a couple of layers of painter's tape around the base of each part, creating a shallow reservoir. I then mixed a small amount of Total Boat epoxy with black tinting and then filled each of these reservoirs. If you have ever noticed what happens when you fill a glass with liquid, around the glass, the liquid rides up on the side. If you remove the glass, or in this case the tape, you have a sharp raised edge that needs to be removed. At this point, I simply sanded the feet until they were smooth. As I assembled the chairs, each piece was clamped in place and then pre-drilled again to make sure that it would not split the wood when putting the screws in place. For the legs, I used 2 1/4 inch stainless steel bolts and with washers on the front and back. Finally, the chairs are ready for delivery. Okay, so the Adirondack chairs are done and they've been delivered, and my neighbors super happy with them. They really came out well. Very proud of the work that I had done. I'm sure somebody else could have done it better, but for where I am in my journey, I think that they came out really good. So I want to cover lessons learned. So I have 3 that I want to touch on: project estimates, template routing, and resawing. So project estimates, when I first started this, I figured I could get it done in about 3 or 4 weeks. Turned out to be almost 6 months. There's a lot of things that factored into that, but at the end of the day, I put about 60 hours into the chairs. A lot of that was, learning how to template route, learning how to use a router table, learning how to resaw, which is one of the lessons learned that I'll be covering in a bit. But yeah, for the time being, I will only give a wag for an estimate, because for where I am right now in my journey, in terms of my tools and skills, that's really the best I'm going to be able to do. I can tell you how much time I'm willing to put into it, but in terms of how long it's actually going to take, in terms of from start to finish, from dates, that's really at this point just going to be a guess. Template routing. So when template routing, this is my first project where I've done template routing. You really need to take into consideration the thickness of the template that you're using and the bit that you're using. And one of the bits that I had used, the gap between the top edge of the router blade and the guide bit or guide bushing was pretty significant, and I almost ruined one of the pieces, because when I went to initially put the board up against the router, the guide bushing didn't catch the template edge the way it should have. So for me, going forward, I'm never going to use another template that's a 1/4 inch thick. I will always use a 1/2 inch or greater. But that was a big lesson learned for me there. Resawing. When resawing, try not to get too close to your final desired thickness. I did this on 2 of the boards and found that I really did not have a lot of room to properly clean the boards when it came time to run them through the planer. These boards wound up getting cleaned up through sanding because I just couldn't get the planer as precise into that final measurement as I could. All right, so the chairs have been delivered to my neighbor. They like them a lot. Hopefully he and his family get many years of enjoyment from them. It was a great learning effort for me, and hopefully you liked it too. So let's cover lessons learned. The first lesson for me was router bushing alignment to the template. For me, when I first started, I was working on one of the legs. I did not have the guide bushing properly aligned to the template, and I wound up taking a small nick out of the top edge of one of the chair legs. It wasn't really a major dig. I wasn't not going to affect the overall quality. In fact, the nick is hidden underneath one of the seat slats, so it's not even something that's visible unless you get up underneath the chair and take a closer look. For me, I think it has, as I'm learning with this, it's more that, you know, the template itself was only a 1/4 inch. I think for myself going forward, at least in the interim, I'm going to prefer to start with 3/8 or 1/2 inch templates. I intend to make these chairs again in the future, so I will be getting a 1/2 inch sheet of MDF and recasting or remaking the templates using that thicker material. Lesson number 2, resawing to your desired thickness. It's always best, well, I can't say always because I'm still learning. Well, in my experience, such as it is, I think going forward it will be better to have to relieve myself the opportunity to take away from the material using a thickness planer to get to my final desired thickness, and not having leaving myself so close that I don't have the opportunity to take as much off and get as clean a final surface as I would like. I did this with the first leg that was cut, and I realized after making the cut that I was too close. I didn't have enough room to clean it up again with the thickness planer when I got to the end. So I wound up making an adjustment on the resawed guide fence to make sure that I had enough material going through on all the other boards. Lesson number 3, managing your recording gear. Again, this is a new experience for me. It's a new journey, and there's a couple of times where I had my camera equipment just a little bit too close to what I was doing, and I wound up bumping into it, and you can see the camera shaking a bit. I'm doing all this on my phone, and you know, I saw some of the equipment that other people are buying. If this thing takes off and I wound up getting you know, much more support, and you know, there's an opportunity to upgrade my camera gear, I'll do that. But for right now, it's gonna be my phone, and I have to be more careful with it. So again, in closing, you know, thanks for taking the time to watch this video all the way to the end. I really do appreciate that. If you like what you saw and you want to see more of it, you know, please like and subscribe. And you know, if you have any suggestions or comments, by all means, you know, for or against, positive or negative, constructive or deconstructive. I do want to hear what people have to say. And I guess that's it. Until next time, take care.